Life Science Success Podcast. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Don and I'm a consultant in life sciences. I work with companies across life sciences, all the way from pharmaceuticals all the way through to medical device. And we're working right now on a series of workshops called Thoughts at Scale. And you could sign up for those by going to the link at the very bottom of this page. thescalingmethod.com/thoughts at scale will take you there. What you do is you'll sign up there, and then I will send you a meeting invite, and you'll be able to join. This week's topic is actually on attention around your strategy and your vision inside of your organization. So again, trying to help organizations think about the things that impact their ability to scale. So with that, I want to bring in our guest in this episode of Life Science Success. My guest is Dr. Jim Woody. He's the CEO of 180 Life Sciences. Dr. Woody leads a pioneering team of scientific innovators at 180 Life Sciences, a clinical stage biotechnology company. So with that, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Don.
Yeah, thanks a lot for being on. I really appreciate it. And just to kind of hop in here, could you tell the listeners just a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, sure. I'm a pediatric immunologist, and early on after I left the Boston Children's Hospital, I was drafted into the U.S. Navy. At that time, they drafted all the doctors, and they put me to work on radiation injuries because at that time the Navy was worried about people on boats that had these reactors and if anybody got exposed. And over the years, we worked out what you needed to do a transplant. We started the National Marrow Donor Program, which you may get to sign up for on your driver's license. And it's helped probably hundreds of thousands of people get bone marrow transplants if they didn't have a matched donor or a sibling. So that was my introduction to immunology. And then I went on and did a PhD at the University of London. I did a lot of infectious diseases and immunology along the way, and eventually helped start several companies. Went over to the dark side. I was in a VC group for about 15 years and helped start a bunch of companies. Some worked, some didn't. And then more recently, my colleagues asked me to join 180 Life Sciences. And the individuals I'm working with back in the 90s, I was the chief scientific officer of a company called Centocor, and we were the very first ones to make an anti-TNF drug. And my colleague, Dr. Mark Feldman in London, who I had studied with, said that he figured out that rheumatoid arthritis was driven by this inflammatory cytokine called tumor necrosis factor. And we treated 10 patients with anti-TNF, the first ever, and they actually got out of their wheelchairs, walked around. Unbelievable.
Wow.
We had no idea that it would be that dramatic, and the rest is history. And now there's no patients in wheelchairs with rheumatoid arthritis because of that drug and the follow-on. And we also learned it worked in Crohn's disease and psoriasis and ulcerative colitis. So there's now about 8 or 9 companies making anti-TNF drugs. It's the largest selling class of biologics, about $40 billion per year. So that's a quick summary. And I'm now head of 180 Life Sciences, and we're finding new indications for anti-TNF is what we're doing now.
Yeah, it's it's a really interesting career. And whenever I think about, all of the different experiences that you've had, out of the journey that you've taken, what's the most impactful things that you've brought to 180 Life Sciences with you?
Well, I think the obviously the most impactful thing was when at Centocor we developed anti-TNF. At that time, the conventional wisdom that was that the people who were dying of sepsis was because there was TNF around. And we treated 50 patients with anti-TNF and it didn't do anything. So the conventional wisdom was incorrect. And actually, afterwards, 4 or 5 other companies did the same thing and got the same result. And then the breakthrough in rheumatoid arthritis and Crohn's disease and psoriasis, I think, has helped more people than probably any other thing that we've done. And that's a lot of personal pleasure in making sure people can live relatively normal lives, even if they have pretty substantial inflammatory disease.
Yeah, but I would even think though, like given your venture capital experience, the all of the medical experience that you had even prior to, coming to 180 Life Sciences, has to have some sort of an impact as well in terms of your ability to lead that team because you understand a little bit more. I would say the broader picture, not just the business side, but also the science side as well.
Yeah, I went and did a PhD, so I understand the science. And as a pediatrician, I'm very patient centric. I was on the board of the Stanford Children's Hospital for about 15 years until about a year ago. And very oriented to whatever we do, I want it to be very helpful to patients. And if it makes money, that's fine. If it doesn't, but it really helps them, that's fine too. But the bottom line is here, it has to provide some real benefit to the patients we're trying to take care of, for sure.
I remember whenever I was researching for this episode and trying to think about the questions that I would ask you and, kind of where we would go in the interview, the one thing that kept coming to mind to me is 180 Life Sciences is such an interesting name because, kind of, I've heard like 360 Life Sciences. I lead, 5280 Life Sciences, which deals with the elevation that I'm at. I'm near Denver, Colorado. So that's the elevation. Whenever I think of 180, it's, about going backwards. But whenever I saw your mission, it helped me make the tie, I would say. This idea of doing a 180 on inflammation. Can you tell us a little bit more about, what led to the name and then, what is the organization trying to do with inflammation as well?
Yeah, one of the ironies is that once at Centocor with Remicade or infliximab, which was the generic name, uh, worked out that it worked in rheumatoid arthritis, Crohn's, psoriasis, and ulcerative colitis. All the other companies have not moved the field very far, and they're all vying for that market. And we said, uh, of all the circulating proteins and cytokines you have in your body, the cytokines kind of tell cells what to do. The bad actor there is TNF, and it starts off the inflammation, which can drive quite a lot of pain and fibrosis, etc. And we said we're going to turn this around, and we're going to see if there's other indications where anti-TNF would be helpful to patients. And we found several, and that's what we're working on in our company. We're turning this around, and we're going after new clear indications rather than trying to battle it out with the 4 or 5 that we identified earlier.
Yeah, my mom's 92 now, and she has a lot of very deformed joints because of rheumatoid arthritis, and has lived with it, for years, and all of the effects, and it's something that I definitely look forward to having better medicines that that treat these things as well because as I look to getting older, one of the things that could obviously happen is I could wind up with it as well.
Yeah, she probably takes Humora. That's the most fashionable drug from AbbVie right now. It's a little better than Remicade in terms of therapy and convenience. But there's some patients where Remicade just is the drug that works the best, and why that is, we're not certain. It had very peculiar properties, but even today, it's $1 billion a year drug for J&J. So it's still around and still being used. And you talk about older people. One of our indications is that in older patients who have a surgical procedure, whether it's a hip replacement or a coronary artery bypass graft or whatever, a lot of them have fog in their mind after the surgery.
Hmm.
It's called postoperative dementia. And up until now, the anesthesiologists will say, well, it's the long anesthesia, etc. We think differently. We think that the tissue damage releases TNF and that it opens up the blood brain barrier and allows inflammatory cells to get into the cognitive areas. About 20% of the patients don't recover. They end up in nursing homes. And so, as we speak, we're starting a trial in patients undergoing hip surgery. and we're administering a single dose of anti-TNF at the time of surgery. And in about a year from now, we'll be able to tell you whether we can prevent some of the postoperative dementia, which would be a huge benefit to a lot of patients, especially elderly ones. As myself, I'm getting older as well. I don't want to have dementia, that's for sure.
Yeah, yeah, it's a really unfortunate thing because you see in patients that have it, they have their moments where they're absolutely clear, and then
Yeah,
they have their moments where they really are disconnected and afraid, and it's a really unfortunate sort of circumstance as well. And so anything that could help with that as well, because obviously lots of us live with a lot of different things in our lifetime, and dementia and Alzheimer's, a lot of different, things wind up, just eventually creeping up on people and unexpectedly. And, it'd be a real shame to have something like, you go to have a joint surgery thinking that, fixing the joint is going to be the end cure. And then all of a sudden, you wake up only to find that there are some disconnects in your memories that, now all of a sudden you're not as clear as you used to be.
it's exactly right. And if we can provide a simple therapy that has no major side effects and reduces that or eliminates it altogether, I think we've done a big favor for a lot of patients who are elderly and undergoing all kinds of surgeries. So we would see that as a huge benefit for all the patients.
Yeah, I also wanted to mention, so we did get one comment, and I'll pop it up here on the screen so you could see it as well. It's from Craig Rowski. He says, this goes back to whenever you're talking about centicourse therapy, and he's saying that, he researched it as well in Amsterdam. And so I just wanted to bring that up, as well, and just, share with everybody the comment. So your company's working on 3 families of drugs. Can you give us an overview of the programs and what stages they're currently in?
Yeah, the use of the anti-TNF inhibitors. The first program is working in a condition called Dupuytren's contracture, and this starts out as a very small nodule in the palm of your hand, about the size of a dime or something, and it becomes more painful, and it causes fibrous cords to pull your fingers together, and you end up with a disabled hand, and that you can't button your clothes, you can't play an instrument, you can't type. And there's some therapies, but none of the therapies are used until actually you have the disability. And that's when you can get drugs like Xiaflex, which is a collagenase trying to dissolve these cords, or eventually they go to surgery of one type or another, which is what happened to my wife after a year of steroid injections. And the surgery generally works, but it's not perfect. Our program, now that we know that TNF is driving these nodules to make these fibrous cords, we're injecting the TNF as soon as the nodule becomes apparent. And the initial clinical trials showed that we could make the nodule smaller, and in some cases, maybe even make it go away. And also, in some cases, we don't have all the numbers yet, but they didn't have to go to surgery for a long time versus those that got the placebo. So we think we have a preventative therapy, which everybody I think would like to have, because none of us want to wait around to see if our hand is going to become contracted. Nobody wants to do that. And this is pretty simple therapy. It's an injection that takes maybe 10 minutes, and you have it 3 or 4 times a year, and that's it. So that's our first program, and we're meeting with the Food and Drug Administration, and also the British equivalent of the FDA called the MHRA, because the trial was initially done in the UK, asking them what we need to get this approved and available to patients. And they're soon going to be mapping out what our strategy would be going forward. But that program's on track, and for a young company to have a drug that's aimed towards approval with maybe one more trial, I think is pretty good. So that's one. The second condition is called frozen shoulder. And the way it starts out is your shoulder is extremely painful. And that lasts for several months until you can't move it. and then it's frozen, the pain kind of decreases, but then you're immobile and your shoulder doesn't work. It's more common in diabetics, and interestingly enough, about half of those patients have Dupuytren's. So we think that the fibrosis in the shoulder is driven by TNF, just like the fibrosis in the palm of the hand, and we'll be initiating trials in frozen shoulder. At present, as I talk to my orthopedic surgeon colleagues, there just isn't much they can do for frozen shoulder outside of the surgery at the end, and the rehab is months and months and months after the surgery. So perhaps we can help those patients by preventing the whole disability as well. So that's one. And then I already mentioned the postoperative dementia trials that'll get off the ground moving forward. So those are the three programs we have in the anti-TNF area. And we're thinking of other things where anti-TNF might be helpful, but we haven't gotten those off the ground. We've got enough on our plate to speak about it just right now.
Yeah, I had an employee, I think he was about 38 years old, that had frozen shoulder. I remember, extremely young to have such a problem. But he went to his doctor. There were things that they were trying to do again, but nothing like your therapy. And who knows whether or not if it's continued to bother him. But I remember, he was before even 40 in his lifespan, and looking at such a critical sort of thing. And I remember just thinking, I could only imagine what your time later in life will be, if you're already having these sorts of issues.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we'll see. We initially tried to do trials in the UK, but the UK system is different in that the patients aren't referred to doctors; they're sent to physical therapists, and the physical therapists weren't so interested in being involved in trials. In the US, that's not the case. They all go to orthopedic physicians and are treated there. And as I talk to them, they're very eager for some kind of therapy to prevent the disability from forming. So I think when we start trials in the U.S., it'll be quite attractive for people to become involved. It's often seen more in diabetics and a variety of other comorbidities, but that will work out as we go forward.
Yeah, and I mean, as you look at the next few years, right? When is the soonest that somebody would actually see one of these drugs in the market then, potentially?
Well, I think if depending on what comes back from the regulatory agencies, the FDA and the MHRA, as to what they need for making an approval and allowing us to offer the drug, it's probably a couple of years would be kind of average. Maybe a little longer, maybe a little shorter. I don't know. We're waiting for the advice from them to come back. Same for the US FDA. They may want two trials. That's common. And so we're all under the guidance of the regulatory agencies to make sure that the therapy is safe and effective. But that's the nature of the system. And everybody thinks you can do things quickly. Well, you can only do it quickly when they let you do it quickly. So one has to be cautious, make sure no patients are harmed, and also that the outcomes are beneficial to the patients that you're treating.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I mean, obviously, being safe and making sure that there aren't any other, unknown side effects and things are important. And, but I think about the future of, the impact that these drugs could have as well. And look forward to seeing that impact out in the market.
Yeah, you mentioned on the chat that there's new drugs for psoriasis now, IL-17. There's a whole host of biologics and also small molecules coming along that sort of build on the therapy that from the anti-TNFs that we generated. But that's fine. I'm happy that there's progress in the area with new drugs that would be coming forward. So good for patients.
Yeah, absolutely. So I like to take a little bit of time and try and understand you and some of the growth that you've experienced throughout your life as well. In terms of the greatest leadership advice that you've ever received, I just would love to hear, what advice you've received in your lifetime that had the greatest impact on you.
Yeah, well, when I finished my residency and the Navy uh, took me in and wanted me to stay, of course, my mother wanted me to be a general pediatrician in some town close to her.
Yeah.
Mothers, as mothers often do. And it didn't work out that way. And I took up the challenge of treating these radiation injuries. And because all the transplants we did initially in Bethesda Naval Hospital, they all died of graft versus host disease. And so that's when I said, we don't understand what's going on. And I had to go back to London and work on human immunology and begin to understand more about the immune system and what we could do. And that's how we founded the National Marrow Donor Program and what antigens had to be matched. And now this is moving forward, and people can get transplants these days. Uh, so I guess the advice to people is that from time to time you get offered opportunities where you may be unsure whether you're able to do it. And in my mind, you should take the chance and you should work hard and be smart and learn as much as you can. You might not be totally successful, but you also store up a whole band of knowledge as to what works and what doesn't work. So that's one thing, and don't shy away from new opportunities that you can take forward. And the other advice of all the people is for biotechnology and everything else is be lucky. Because who would have ever guessed that these patients with rheumatoid arthritis would have gotten out of their wheelchairs after a single infusion of one drug. That was amazing. And every once in a while that happens. As I look at, say, Alzheimer's disease, we really don't know what's going on there. And despite all the trials and all of the massive amounts of money in it, we really don't understand what the dynamics are. And somebody's going to have a flash of insight and say, this is how it works. And at that point, we'll all be on whatever medicine that is. Because I don't want to forget any more passwords. That's for sure.
Yeah, well, I mean, I could tell you still I'm what, 55 now, and at 55 I have to have a password manager because there's just too many of them, and they keep getting longer and longer to try and keep people out. So I don't blame you for that one.
Well, this is the cognitive test these days. How many you have to write and stick on your computer or have your password manager?
Right? Yeah, exactly. So there are three questions that I like to ask every guest. What inspires you?
Uh, well, I think as a pediatrician, you're very interested in the health of children who often can't speak for themselves, and it's a it's a kind of an attitude that drives you to do the best you can for any patients that you can. And insofar as we're able to do that, I'm happy to try. And even though I don't know all the answers, I'm willing to spend a lot of energies trying to help people going forward with whatever technologies that we can bring to bear. So that kind of drives me on a personal basis. And I'm not one who wants to retire or anything, especially if I can make any contributions going forward. And that seems to be the case. So far, so good. I have other companies I work with, some in autism, some in different areas of inflammation, but they're all aimed at the same thing of providing benefit to patients going forward.
So important. What concerns you?
Uh, I think I think the thing that concerns me most, and when I was on the board of the Children's Hospital, I managed their quality and safety committee, which related to what was the outcome for the patients. Did they do well? Did they have problems, etc.? And I actually spent quite a lot of time talking to the clinicians taking care of them. And their complaint was that they had to fill out endless numbers of forms, that they had moved all of the patient care activities away from them, and they only had a limited amount of time to actually talk to their patients because they had to fill out their forms on their Epic systems or whichever system they had to use, and that worried them all. because they're getting away from the classic part of medicine, which is talking to your patients and taking care and find out what they really are concerned about, and taking the time to provide whatever benefit you can, because they were pushed by the system and the reporting structures of the hospital systems to spend a lot of time on paperwork. That's
Yeah.
and I see that continuing. I don't see a way around it, and that's disappointing. Lots of times you can go see your doctor, and they never even touch you.
Mm.
They're sitting there at a computer and they're talking to you a little bit while they're typing, filling out their forms at the same time. I find that disappointing from the way I was trained as an intern and resident and as a practicing physician.
Yeah, it's interesting to me the differences between different physicians as well. And I don't know how different physicians handle the paperwork aspect of it, because I've never asked that question, but I think it'd be a good question maybe for the next time I see this. But I was with a friend in the hospital, and the physician came in and sat down in a chair and actually had an in-depth conversation in the hospital. Didn't stare at the computer. They had somebody else that came in along the way, and they definitely were taking care of some paperwork. But I just wonder, was that physician able to have somebody that helps to support the paperwork? But it's one of those things where occasionally you see it now. And whenever you talked about kind of earlier in your career, being in a small town and being a general practitioner, um, you know, I just kind of see those folks today. I mean, they're completely swallowed by paperwork, because they're always staring at the computer, even whenever they're trying their best, to connect with you while you're there. Um, the one thing that Craig was asking as well in the chat was, how do you feel about telehealth? What is your thoughts around that as well?
Uh, yeah, I have some thoughts about telehealth. What's happening in some situations is they actually send a scribe along with you.
Ah,
There's
okay.
people trying to build AI computer programs to listen to what the patient's saying and try to transcribe that. So all of this is kind of cooking along. It hasn't hit prime time yet, but it's coming, and I could see that as a potential solution. Interestingly enough, we asked some of the children at the children's hospital to draw a picture of their doctor, and so the one picture we got was the back of a head against a computer. That was that was the doctor, and it just made the case, that's what it was really like. Uh, I think the telemedicine actually is effective, and I think that once you're seen personally by a physician, that lots of times you can follow up with a Zoom call or whatever format you use to follow up on the results and things to do, so you can talk with them and actually see them, and that's very helpful because it's very time effective, and it's convenient now. And a lot of our patients were a long ways away, so
Hmm.
for them to come into the hospital was a huge problem. It took, sometimes a couple of days to get in, get a hotel, whatever they were going to do. And for some people, that was very difficult. So I think in some instances, this is quite valuable. But at some point, you really need to see a hands-on physician and be really examined. That's the key to start with, I think.
Yeah. Well, thank you for sharing that. Here's the last question. What excites you?
Uh, what excites me is the next generation of anti-inflammatory agents, and it turns out that there's two different receptors for TNF, and when TNF binds to one of the receptors, it causes the inflammation, and when TNF binds to the other receptor, it's anti-inflammatory. And what we're doing now is we're blocking all the TNF from binding to anything,
Hmm.
and that has some problems with infectious diseases. Makes you a little more susceptible, and every one of the anti-TNF inhibitors and even the small molecule TNF inhibitors all have the same warning that you're more susceptible to infections. Maybe we can find a way to shut down the inflammatory one and turn on the anti-inflammatory one and avoid some of those things and get the patient benefit. And the idea that we might be able to do that in the future is actually quite exciting to me.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I completely agree. I look forward to seeing a lot of the things that you're currently working on at 180 Life Sciences. And Dr. Jim Woody, thank you so much for being with us and sharing everything that you're currently working on.
Don, I appreciate your nice podcast and the actually the quite good questions you had. It's very good.
Thanks
Well
so
done.
much. Yeah.